All right, we are live. Welcome everyone. Wow, already 137 people in the room. Welcome
Ah,
on this Wednesday. Hopefully, most of you are enjoying. I guess the start of fall. Really, really crazy. This is awesome. Love seeing so many familiar names join. Couple questions for you. I'm selfishly still trying to figure out my Halloween costume this year, so let me know where you're tuning in from and if you have any good Halloween costume ideas this year. I would love to know.
wait, can I share
And
mine? Because I'm like so happy with myself. I can't even.
please,
First, I just want to say I see so many people that I know in the chat, and I want you to know I see you, that you're here, and I love you, and thank you for tuning in, especially Sarah and Melissa and all the bookkeeping butts. So thank you. Okay, can I tell you about my costume? Because I'm so proud.
yes, please do.
Okay. All right. So you may know that I am speaking at Intuit Connect next week. Which happens to land. It goes through the 30th, and then we're all like a bunch of us are flying back on the 31st. So we were like, hey, it would be really fun to get together and do costumes. And I've wanted to dress as a pinata for a really long time, and I found this awesome pinata costume. At first, though, somebody had suggested, I think it was Alicia Katz Pollock and Rachel Dauchi had suggested, wouldn't it be fun if we did a group costume? And I said, it would be really fun. I could dress as Carmen Miranda and everybody else could dress like fruit. Wouldn't that be funny? But then I looked at my Carmen Miranda like headdress and I was like, there's no way I can carry that to Vegas and back. It's like big and heavy. It would like take a whole suitcase. So I was like, no, I can't do that. But then Liz Scott and Heather Satterley didn't see that we decided against the fruit thing. And so they ran with it and they told everybody in happy hour to dress as fruit. But I already had a pinata costume by that point, right? You can see where this is going. Big problem because I'm a pinata. Everybody else is going to be fruit. Everything's a disaster. What am I going to do? I solved this problem yesterday, which is I'm wearing a watermelon dress underneath my pinata costume, right? And I've got watermelon sunglasses. So I'll be a pinata. And then if they say, wait, I thought we were going to dress as fruit, I can unzip my pinata costume and put on my sunglasses and be like, I'm a watermelon.
You're always so prepared, Nancy.
I
I
am.
love it. I love it.
I'm going to take it just one step further, just for a second, which is that my conference bestie, Melissa Miller Ferguson, she was trying to decide what she wanted to do. And we wanted her to participate in both the pinata and the fruit thing. So she's going to be a bat because she'll be like the bat that, I mean, she's a bat, like the animal, right? But she can bat my pinata, but she's also a fruit bat. So that's like next level, guys.
I
Oh,
love
it's
it.
all connected. I love it.
And we're gonna see this at Intuit Connect.
Oh, yeah.
Love it.
I'm excited.
On the 30th, I think it's the 30th that we're all dressing up. And then Diamond got everybody, a bunch of people to do Tutu Tuesday. So if you have a tutu, bring it with you. Chad, I know you do. So please bring yours.
It's already packed.
Great. Cool.
Awesome. Well, thanks for sharing, Nancy. Let's get this show on the road. I guess we're nearing 200, so everybody's joining us about the most exciting topic, 1099s. But maybe the theme is fitting: Halloween, spookiness, 1099s. Everybody's scared of it. Everybody's got horror stories. So this is great timing. So just for way of introduction, my name is Josh Musler. I'm part of the Keeper team. We got a great cast today, but I am far from being the star of the show. Nancy and Chad are really the experienced practitioners when it comes to 1099. So Madison and myself are here to just make the experience a little better in the background for you. But let's get it started. A practical guide for integrating 1099 management into your workflows. Just a little agenda before I turn it over to Nancy and Chad to tell their spooky stories about 1099s. But we'll start with 1099 problems that we've all experienced. Chad and Nancy will share theirs. We'll then move into 1099 and W-9 fundamentals. This is strategies to help you and your clients stay compliant with the IRS. And then we'll talk about 1099 streamlined, how Keeper is helping change the game from a 1099 standpoint, and then we'll save some time for questions. I know we did this last time and there was a ton. It made it a lot of fun and it was very interactive. So looking forward to another great session today. Chad, Nancy, I'll turn it over to you both.
All right. Well, can you go back one slide because I just
Yeah.
want to mention something in particular about this. All right. So this is a tip of the hat to Diamond, who is in the chat over here. She is amazing, and she has an incredible resource, which is a payment method guide. So you know all those crazy rules about in which case you have to do this or you have to do that or the other. Josh has put that in the links section. There's like a little links I don't know, button or something like that, but I've also dropped it in chat and it's amazing. Anyway, this title was her idea, and so I wanted to make sure she gets credit for that because it's pretty hilarious. Okay, next slide. Horror story. So this happened a long time ago, and I bet, I'm hoping a lot of people here are too young to remember the days when we used to have to print out and stuff envelopes and stick stamps on them and get these things postmarked by January 31st. If you're in the chat and you remember doing these things on paper and having to get them postmarked, all right, I'm seeing some like, yes, there are definitely some horror. Yes. Okay. So it was a miserable time. It was miserable. We all know how miserable it was. It was so awful. I'm feeling the like, it's reverberating here. You know, it's really resonating with everybody how awful that was. So there were some things that were way harder back then, and there are some things, honestly, that are way harder now than they were back then. Like back then, pretty much everybody paid through AP. You know, they just wrote checks, and so we didn't have to deal with the zillions of different payment methods that we have to deal with today. But some things never change. The amount of time it takes to collect a W-9 from a vendor that doesn't want to give it to you, that hasn't changed. And the need for the books to be up to date before you can even fully review for vendors, those are some things that way back when we had to deal with and we're still dealing with today. So those things were a real pain in my rear, and I was having a really tough time handling all these 1099s alone because at the time I was still a sole proprietor. So this is back in the day. And I asked a friend of mine who was a non-practicing CPA if she could help me out with 1099 season. She said, sure, no problem. Well, a couple days before January 31st, because without something like Keeper to manage these projects, like I couldn't see the status. There was no transparency about where she was in that process. So a couple days beforehand, before the deadline, she's like, yeah, you know, I'm having trouble getting W-9s from these like 100 people. And these clients, their books aren't up to date. So I just didn't know what to do. And I'm like, oh my God, it's 2 days before the deadline. Like, what are we going to do?
That's so scary.
It was so scary. I was freaking out. I mean, I looked a lot like that horrible picture of me, which, dear Lord, where is that from? Where did you, is that from, that's from Connect last year, isn't it? Or a couple of years ago. Oh God.
That is.
I think I was really hungover in that picture. Anyway, so it ended up being January 31st. It was at her place with her husband and my husband and me, frantically going through, and I was entering numbers into the software that I used to use back then, and they were printing them out on this special perforated paper and then stuffing the envelopes and stamping the envelopes. And I had to drive down to the main post office in Chicago right before midnight on January 31st to get them postmarked. Honestly, if I had Keeper back then, like none of this would have happened. And it's still what I think of when, no matter how awful January is now, I think of that experience and I'm like, oh gosh, it's so much better than it used to be. Even though it's worse than it used to be in some ways, I will never have to do that again. Now, I know Chad has a story too, and Chad is a little bit more serious than mine, but still, that sucked.
Yeah, it is. It's not fun to get to the end of the year and then start scrambling to try and pick up the pieces and see what's missing. I know for the longest time, me and the firms that I had been a part of had kind of like not found an efficient way to identify those vendors and collect those W-9s throughout the year. So it was traditionally something that we pushed off until after year end, we knew we had all the activity in there. That's when we would start identifying those vendor lists and like manually trying to identify the year-to-date spends on these vendors that hit the threshold, who are going to need W-9s, then start trying to collect those W-9s from those vendors. And that process starts immediately after 12/31, historically. Now,
Right.
as many of you are anticipating and know for yourselves, that is not a good idea. That is a recipe for disaster. And that's where I found myself in 2021. So this screenshot here that Josh has on screen for us is actually a screenshot from my discharge form from a local hospital here in Chicago. When in early January, I got through a couple days of trying to identify these eligible vendors and see all the information that we were missing. I got to the point where I was like, oh my gosh, we have so much to do. I don't even know where to start. This is ridiculous. To the point where like chest pains were present. So, just to be safe, went to the hospital here in Chicago and had it looked at. They concluded not a heart attack, but still very scary, just a panic attack, right? But yeah, that was a good lesson for myself, that the way that we've traditionally handled 1099s is not sustainable. It is not healthy. And we have to find a way to be more on top of those throughout the year. So that way we're not scrambling in January to pick up the pieces. Now, hopefully there are no other attendees here that have similar hospital visit stories based on 1099s, but I expect that many of you can relate to the headache and the chaos that is and has been January for the past couple of years.
I hope that people in the chat are like, well, this puts things into perspective. Right? Like that has not happened to me, and I'm really glad that hasn't happened to me. But that doesn't mean like just because you haven't ended up in the hospital that it doesn't suck. Like it still sucks. And we see you. Just don't let it get as bad as Chad's situation here. That's like
it's all
special.
on the spectrum, right? With the hospital visit being very at the far end of that, it doesn't have to be that bad. Let's take it
No,
to the other
that's
side
next
and make
level
it
though.
stress-free. Yeah.
That's next level. Yeah. All right. Well, now that we've told our stories, we should probably tell you who we are. What do you think? Yeah. Okay. Sounds good. Can you hit that again? Because I am not seeing all of my words on there. There we go. All right. Fantastic. That's me. I'm Nancy. I'm Nancy, the dancing accountant. And I have been running my own small business, let me see, bookkeeping, accounting, tax, and advisory firm. We do the whole scope of services for a hyper local group. I'm also in Chicago, the best city in the world. And Chad, how come we haven't like gotten together for a drink yet? Like we keep meaning to do this. Yeah. It's because we have so much fun hanging out on webinars. So maybe
And
anyway,
Vegas
and Vegas and all of the conferences. Yeah. So we've been helping a hyper local group of small businesses for 23 years now, because I truly believe that when we help the small businesses, their communities thrive. And then I also educate the professionals who serve these small businesses, because I want to help your communities too. And that's why I launched Ask a CPA. There are a bunch of Ask a CPA members in the chat here. I see you. Hi, I'm so glad you're here. This is a Q&A membership for bookkeepers who want to really level up and learn how to prepare tax-ready books. And I will drop a link in there. I think Josh has that in the links section as well that he can share out. If you're interested in learning more about that. We meet twice a month and we have so much fun answering questions. Everybody gets to submit questions, people upvote them. I also have all these very impressive credentials, but most importantly, I am also a dancer. And that is why my company is called The Dancing Accountant. Chad?
Ooh, yeah, Josh, do we want to go to the next one? Perfect. Thank you to Maddie for editing my headshot here. I've had some pretty bad headshots in the past with like this horrible background, and Maddie cleaned this up for me. So shout out to Maddie for making me beautiful again. A little bit about me. I am an account executive here at Keeper, which is a fancy way of saying that I give a lot of product demos and introduce firms to Keeper every day. It's a real privilege, and I come into Keeper with a lot of experience from a prior accounting career where I was a CPA and worked at various firms for over 10 years before joining the Keeper team. So really understand a lot of the pain points that many of our users are going through, and now have the opportunity to share with them some tools that make their lives easier. So yeah, really excited to use today to talk a little bit more about 1099 specifically, as we just saw, that was a major pain point for me in the past. So excited to keep moving here.
All right, let's dive in. We're gonna go over some fundamentals, and I'm gonna put a lot of gems in here along the way. So even if you already know the fundamentals, you are certain to learn something new. I remember last time that we did this, Josh was like, okay, well, I know y'all want to get in the weeds, but we're limited on time, so we're only going to go through the NEC and the MISC. And I was like, nobody wants to get in the weeds. I don't know where you got that idea. People do not want to get, this is horrible stuff. Like, I'm going to take you a little bit into the weeds, but not like all the way into the weeds. If you are one of the weirdos that actually wants to go deep on this, I do have an article from on MSN. Now, this is an article that I update every year. So this is the version for last year. I have not updated it yet for this year, but luckily we have very few changes this year, which I'm really excited about. And this article that I wrote for MSN is one of my most popular ones. And I every year the bookkeeping buds actually help me clean this up and edit it and add new things. And I'm very much indebted to them for helping out. So if you want to get into the weeds, that's a good place to go. The ones that we're going to talk about today are just the NEC and the MISC. But I want to give Chad just a second to talk about, there's the 1099 INT, which is for interest, which a lot of people accidentally skip for their small business owners because they don't realize that the small business owners, if they have a loan that has been made to the company, they need to be paid interest when that is getting paid back to them. And that needs to be reported on an INT. So a lot of people skip that. And if you've got a C Corp and they, instead of having something set up as a loan, they're getting paid back through distributions, or they make a personal payment or something like that, that actually has to go on a DIV. And historically, Keeper hasn't been able to help us with those. But Chad, do you want to briefly tell me what you were sharing before about this?
Yeah. So the focus in the past has been identifying vendors in Keeper that have hit that NEC or MISC year-to-date spend threshold. But we've got some plans to bring in some custom 1099 reports that are going to be able to identify those vendors that would meet the requirements for the 1099 INT, DIV, and many of the other types of many 1099 forms. So that way, depending on how many of these are applicable to your clients, you're going to have the tools in Keeper to manage all of them.
And this is, you guys are hoping to roll this out before year end, right?
Yes.
So we'll have it in time for this coming 1099 season. Okay.
That's right.
I have some team members who are on the call, and I just got to say, yo, guess what? Yay. Woo. I'm so excited about this. Woo, woo, woo.
We put it on record now, engineering team. So we got to do it.
You just committed to it in front of everybody. So, okay, so today we're just going to go over, there are like 20 different kinds of 1099 forms. We're just going to focus on the NEC and the MISC for this call. So if you can do the next slide, Josh, that would be great. So, actually, go back a slide. I'm going to stick with this for a second. So as most of the people on this call probably know, up until a few years ago, for non-employee compensation, there was just the 1099 MISC. And there are a lot of other boxes on that form. So royalties would go in one box and rent in another. And there was a box called non-employee compensation. And what happened a few years ago is the IRS realized the gig economy is just exploding. And so the deadline for that MISC was to get the stuff to the IRS, because there's the date by which you have to send the thing to the vendor, and there's the date by which you have to send them to the IRS. And the IRS, depending on whether you paper filed or e-filed, could have been the end of February or the end of March. And so what was happening is that people, freelancers, and other people who are participating in the gig economy, they were filing their tax returns and omitting, accidentally or intentionally, they were omitting this non-employee compensation. And the IRS was like, we can't wait until the end of February or the end of March to get this information on these people. We need it sooner. And so what they did was they split out just the non-employee compensation part of the MISC. And so that's what NEC stands for on the 1099. NEC is non-employee compensation. They actually reused an old form from the 1980s. I'm not old enough to have been doing taxes back then. I'm not sure if there's anyone on here who recognizes that form, but they put that back into service. And now the NEC is the bane of our existence instead of the MISC. That doesn't mean we don't have to fill out the MISC, which is miscellaneous, for rent, royalty, attorney settlements, not like fees paid to attorneys, but settlements, or other 1099s, like we were just talking about, the INT for interest or the DIV for dividends. I work with a lot of co-ops, so we've got PATR for patronage. We might have to fill out those as well, but the bane of its existence is the NEC, because its due date for both vendors and the IRS is the end of January. And so that's why it became an even worse scramble when they changed that date than it used to be. Okay, so next slide now. W-9. We all know the W-9, but our clients and vendors do not get this about it. When we ask them for a W-9, we are not saying you are going to get a 1099. That's not what the W-9 is for. We're saying, we don't know. How do we know? You might not. We just want to information collect from you. We're just saying, could you please give this information so that we can determine whether or not you might need to receive a 1099. So I have been learning from Nicole Davis that there is no such thing as over communicating. Your clients will prefer more communication rather than less. So the more we can educate our clients to educate their vendors, or now through Keeper, we can educate the vendors directly as well when we request a W-9 directly from the vendor. That's what that second little screenshot that's kind of in the corner there, that's sitting on top of the W-9, that's the screenshot in Keeper where you're actually directly asking the client's vendor to fill out a W-9. It is gold. If anybody has used this in Keeper, please give them some love in the chat and tell anybody who's not using Keeper how amazing this is. Chad, I think you were telling me or maybe it was you, Josh, that there was somebody you talked to who actually like gets new clients from the vendors.
Yeah. We and I'm going to highlight this a little bit later, but thank you for teasing it. I'm going to show you what it looks like from the vendor's perspective, and there is an option to add a little advertisement for your firm that says, if you're looking for accounting or bookkeeping support, here's the link to our website. So that's excited to share what that looks like. And then one of the other things that I'll call out there is including language in those vendor requests where you're calling out specifically what you just said, Nancy, where this isn't for a guaranteed 1099. We know that you may not require a 1099, but we need the information. And so being able to, like you said, educate the vendors at the same time while you're making those requests goes a long way.
You know, Chad, we don't actually do that. And I know that Sarah is on this call. So Sarah, can you please write that down? I want to edit our language to explain what I just explained. Thank you so much. That is I just like said it to y'all, but we don't actually have that in our default language through Keeper to the vendor. So I learned something. We can end the webinar now. I'm good. I learned something new. Okay, so actually no. All right, my point here is that if we can actually get our clients to require a W-9 from their vendors before they pay them, then we're not even going to have to get to the point in Keeper where we collect the W-9 from the vendor, right? Because it's only once that payment is popping up in QuickBooks Online, which is syncing with Keeper, which is like the most amazing thing in the entire world. And I love it so much, I could cry. It's only once that happens that it goes, oh, hey, there's a new vendor and you might want to ask them for a W-9. That's what Keeper does, and it's so incredible. Ideally, we should educate our clients to send this request out before they pay them, because if we can educate the vendors that this is just collecting information, we're all going to be better off. And also, you don't have to chase them down afterward where they're like, oh, I didn't think I was just going to get reported to the IRS. You're like, yeah, you did, because I'm not giving you your payment until you do this. So something that I want to make sure that people in this call know, because I get this question a lot. Once you get that W-9, it is not your problem if they filled it out wrong or not. Having that in your file and your client having that in your file, it just means that if somebody lied to you on that W-9 or they didn't know how to fill it out or did it wrong, it's not your problem. This is your CYA. Now I have a wonderful colleague in Bookkeeping Buds named Question Telka, and she put together a really lovely video series on how to fill out a W-9. And I'm going to share that in chat here. That is another thing that you can do to educate your clients. You can actually say to them, let me navigate back here to chat. Okay, I just dropped that in chat. So you can actually say to them, hey, you can send this video to your vendors. And if the vendor's unsure about how to fill out the W-9, you're like, here you go. Here is how to fill out a W-9. So the more you can get your client to do ahead of time, because they have these personal relationships with the vendors, the better off we're all going to be. Next slide, please. So let's say that somebody fills out that W-9, and it turns out they are in fact required to be sent a 1099. Now's the part where we're like, okay, let's go into Keeper and mark that this person is in fact eligible for a 1099 or that they're not. If you mark that they're not, you never have to see them again. All those corporations that over and over and over again would show up in our QuickBooks reports that we were running before using Keeper, we don't have to worry about them anymore, because once I mark them as not needing a 1099, that's it. So something that I want to point out here is that for us, getting rid of the horror stories, the stress that goes into 1099 season was a sort of a two-part process for us. Before we discovered Keeper, before we implemented Keeper, we took the first step toward making this less painful, which was that we switched our once a year practice in terms of collecting W-9s and determining who would need a 1099, stuff like that. We switched to a monthly process. And so we would actually go through QuickBooks, and we have a whole series of reports we had to run, and each of the bookkeepers on each of the clients would run this report every month. And so they would see the same ones over and over and over again that they had already determined didn't need a 1099, but at least we were catching the new ones. And so even if you're not, for whatever reason, going to decide to get Keeper, I really recommend at least doing that. And then Keeper just really next leveled that. We like next leveled it by like 3 or 4 times, and it just keeps getting better. But switching it to a monthly process, that was the first step that we took there that made a really, really huge difference. All right, so when to send Form 1099 NEC. I think that's the next slide. If you are a non-C corporation, if you paid a non-C corporation, I mean, a lot of people get confused about that. They think it's if you paid an individual. That is not the rule. It's if you pay a non-C corporation. Actually, not just non-C, non-corporation. I shouldn't have said C. So you pay a non-corporation, which means if it's a single member LLC, you get a 1099. If you are a multi-member LLC and you haven't done a corporate election, you get a 1099. I feel like that Oprah meme. If you're a partnership, you get a 1099. So there are lots of non-individuals that get 1099s, and that's a really common misunderstanding. Maybe not for y'all, but for your clients. So educate them. So when we let clients DIY this process, They skip those people. We see errors over and over. If you have a practice where the client is telling you who their 1099 vendors are and you are issuing those 1099s, I guarantee you are missing some 1099 vendors. So this is something, it should be a responsibility that should be ours. Even though I don't want it, I hate 1099s. I do not want this responsibility. But I love my clients. I love my clients so much. I do not want them to get this wrong. I want this responsibility to be on my shoulders because I know what I'm doing. And my amazing team, they're the ones who are really doing all this work anyway. Thank you. We know how to identify these vendors and our clients don't. Now, there are lots of exceptions. Like if they're an attorney, even if they're a corporation, they get a 1099. That's a detail that's in the weeds, but it's a really important detail that we're going to know and our clients are not. So if you accidentally send a 1099 to somebody who it turns out filled out their W-9 wrong and they're really incorporated. I got one last year from a colleague that I work with. So she was doing this for a client that we share. And so I got a 1099 and I was like, hey guys, check the W-9 on file. I've got an S-Corp election. And it turned out the client had never given them the W-9s that they had on file, which is totally classic. But anyway, it's fine. Like if you end up sending it to somebody who has a corporate election, that's fine. Don't worry. They'll just throw it away. It doesn't matter. But it's supposed to be if you paid a non-corporation, and then you're paying them for services, not products. Now, you would think that that's a really obvious thing, right? Like services, not products. We'll talk a little bit more about this later. But the basic rule is for services, not products. And that's a little bit more complicated than you expect sometimes. And then the third rule is via check, cash, ACH, Zelle, wire transfer, but not merchant services or electronic payments such as credit and debit cards. Now, there is a super long list of these. It is mind-blowing. Diamond is in the chat, and Josh, if you could share out her link again, that would be great. And I'm going to put this in chat also. Diamond has gone so far into the weeds on this one. I honestly was worried she would never come back. It's amazing how complex that gets. So I'm not going to get into the specifics because we don't have enough time. And then the fourth rule is $600 or more in a calendar year. And then the other thing on that screen is just kind of a teaser for what Chad is going to go over later, which is what this looks like in Keeper. So a question I get a lot is what to do if they're using personal PayPal, personal Venmo, friends and family, you know, that checkmark box. You do need to send a 1099 for those. So again, I just want to highlight Diamond's priceless resource. She's actually going to be joining us on the next edition of this webinar when we do it for Earmark, and she's going to talk a little bit about the cray-cray over here. Actually, I did not grab the registration link to that one. If anybody's got the registration link to that Earmark one, please throw that in the chat as well. So this is a paid resource, but is worth every penny because she lists all of the weird ones where you're like, what about Pluto if I used it this way and not that way? What about Cash App if blah, 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 so on and so on. So this goes back to what I was saying earlier about how it was harder when we had to do these things on paper, but it was also so much easier because we didn't have all of these fintech companies going like,
where one does it one way and Zelle all of a sudden has the exception, and
totally.
It's so difficult.
The problem is that when the IRS set the rule, instead of defining what was going to need a 1099 NEC and what wasn't, they gave some really general guidance and they let the various vendors decide for themselves whether that guidance applied to them or not. So we've got Zelle as somebody that you do need to issue a 1099 for. They're like, we're not a third-party electronic payment provider. And I'm like, that's funny because I use Zelle a lot and it looks like a third-party electronic payment to me, but it's not because they looked at the IRS guidance and they found some loophole and decided that they're not. Chad, I think you said something last time about contacting Chase to ask about Zelle.
Yeah, because I got to, again, the end of the year and had all these Zelle payments and was preparing to issue 1099s for other electronic payment folks. And so I called Zelle and was like, can y'all provide some guidance on this? There's nothing on their website, nothing posted anywhere, but yeah, they confirmed that they are not issuing 1099s for the payments. That was probably a year or two ago now, but yeah, that was
It's crazy.
an example of the nuance and the, the
Totally.
trickery here.
Josh, if you could go to the next slide, there is one thing I want to call out on here just because it is possibly the most common question that I get, is that you or your clients may end up in a situation where some payments to contractors go through like Gusto, or I think QuickBooks has like a contractor payment thing, but other payments went through your regular company AP. It's okay for them to get two 1099 NECs from the same issuer, as long as they don't double count dollars. We deep dived into this a few years back to figure out how to handle it and have an official answer on this one. So if Gusto, for example, who's we and a lot of our clients use for making contractor payments as well, Gusto will kind of issue that 1099 for you. I have an MSN article on that one. They don't. It's not as nice as it used to be. You have to go through and help Gusto sort of get those out. It's a little annoying. It's a very complex article. I won't go into it here, but you can look it up if you follow me on MSN. But if you got the contractor payments going through Gusto and then you also paid them in some other way, go ahead and issue them a 1099 just for that additional part. Now, when we do this internally as a best practice, we issue that second 1099, like the one that Gusto didn't issue. We do that even if it's under 600, right? Because their total pay for the year is still going to be over 600. Chad?
Yeah, good call. I hadn't thought about that, but yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. So, next slide. Let's see if I remember where we are. Okay, right. So when to file and what the penalties are. All the dates are on there, but there are a couple things that I want to highlight. So these didn't used to be big penalties. They used to be really small. So people didn't really care if they got all the vendors or not. They didn't really care if they hit the deadlines or not because the penalties were small. And the IRS through the years has just stepped them up and up and up and up and up. And now we're talking big money if this stuff doesn't get filed because it's per 1099 form. It's crazy, right? So in my personal experience, in real life, the only time that the IRS is really going to charge you these is if it's egregious and you're just not filing that 1099 at all. It is so much better to file late than not at all. And I'm going to tell you why. I am also a tax preparer. And when we are preparing our clients' returns, the IRS over the course of the past few years has started adding a little box. There is an FAQ at the end of this slide deck. I think everybody, I don't know if it's a download that you've already shared or if everybody gets this afterward. Josh, you can speak to that in the chat if you like, but you will get a copy of these. And at the end, there's like a 4-page FAQ from questions we got from the last time. And I actually have a little screenshot of this section of the tax return where it says, did you or will you file a 1099 for all of the vendors that need it? Now, I cannot legally check that box or let that client file a return where they have checked the box if I know that they haven't or won't. I can't do that. So you're not doing your clients a service and you're certainly not improving your relationship with that tax preparer if you know that the clients aren't including all of their vendors in the 1099s. But the important part here is that it doesn't say, did you file it on time? They don't care if you filed it on time or not. I mean, okay, they care, but they don't care. And so I have had situations where you've got a client who didn't have their books together, so they went on extension for their income tax return and they took forever. And now we're looking at the September business return extension deadline or the October sole prop extension deadline. And these people are just now getting their books together. And we're like, oh, look, you needed to send out these 1099s and they missed some of them. So we'll do it in September. We'll do it in October. We'll issue those 1099s because it's the vendor's responsibility to report that income anyway. If they complain about it after the fact, that's too bad. If they didn't report that income because they didn't get a 1099, like, you should keep better records. Hire somebody as a bookkeeper who's on this call.
That's right.
And right? So the IRS is going to get that information and they're going to compare it to the tax return under that Social Security number or the EIN that was filed. And if that total amount that they reported doesn't include that 1099, if that's missing, they're going to get a CP notice at some point from the IRS. So that's why it's super important to protect your clients. Your job is not to protect their vendors. Your job is to protect your clients, and they want to be able to check that box that said, did you or will you? Yes, I know that by the time that return gets filed, even if it's late, we will have filed the 1099 for that client. Now, let's look at the next slide because this is a little bit different. And what this is if you do file the 1099, but the information on it is wrong, the name and the tax ID number don't match. I know I got a lot of people in Ask a CPA asking, just like in the past few weeks, because these are called CP 2100 notices. They're tax ID number match letters. They went out in late September, so a bunch of our clients just got these recently, saying the information we got is from you, the client, that you sent out the 1099s on behalf of like your vendors, that you sent to your vendors that the IRS got copies of. It doesn't match. And so that's a whole different set of fines and penalties and all of that kind of stuff. And you may have to do backup withholding. Don't want to get too far into the weeds, but I want to make sure you know what those are. Most of the time you can ignore those letters. If you just check the W-9 and you compare it against what you filed, it's probably that like it's the SSN instead of the EIN, or the DBA name instead of the person's name, or something like that. And as long as they're not like actually faking it, you don't have to worry about it. You can just not worry about it. Okay, next slide, please. So some key changes to be aware of from last year. The IRS reduced the electronic filing threshold down to 10. For now, we don't care about this as bookkeepers and accountants because we've been using Check 1099 or Tax 1099 or QuickBooks or whatever for a really long time. So we're not talking about sending these to the vendors. We're talking about filing with the IRS and sending the copy of these that we used to have to do on paper, and thank goodness we don't have to anymore. And so we don't care about this, but our clients should. I have a lot of clients that want to DIY in order to save money. And we know when clients DIY, they're skipping vendors accidentally. They're ordering these free forms from the IRS and filling them out by hand. They can't do that anymore if they have more than 10 forms. So last year, we had a bunch of people, last minute calls from vendors that usually don't have us do our clients that don't normally ask us to do their 1099s, who now want us to. But the IRS launched Iris, which is a new free online portal for these businesses. We're not allowed to use that. That's not for accountants and bookkeepers. That's for the clients who want to file their own. Now for 2025, there are no new changes for 1099s. A lot of people thought there were because the House passed a bill to increase the reporting threshold to $1,000 instead of $600, but the Senate voted it down. It was part of a bigger vehicle and they voted the whole thing down. And so currently there are no changes. I want to talk about 1099K just for a second. It's something that affects us a lot, even though we don't have to file them. This is the thing that covers the third-party merchant services. Okay, so our clients receive these from their merchant services, and the vendors are receiving these from the merchant services that our clients are using. So these 1099Ks are awful from a tax preparer's perspective because 1099K shows everything that was processed through it, whether it was income or not. So sales tax is in there, tips are in there, gift cards are in there. There's all this stuff that's sitting on the balance sheet is in there. And reconciling that against the actual income reported on the client's return is a pain. It is not fun at all. So we have a whole reconciliation process internally that I'm going to be helping folks in Ask a CPA learn how to do to help their CPA out and reconcile this beforehand. So just wanted to mention that. Lots of good information on the slide on that one. Okay, I am running way over. So let's see what the next slide has to say and how close we are. Okay, great. So Josh, let's go through this crazy list of all of the things that make 1099s way too hard. I got this from Diamond. Friends, what did she say? Like friends shouldn't let let 1099s be too hard or something like that. I don't remember exactly what she said. But yes, so it shouldn't be this hard. It is. Determining and tracking which clients want the 1099 prep in the first place, identifying which of the vendors is eligible, determining vendor entity types, especially like the LLCs that have that S Corp election, but they don't know how to fill out the W-9 properly, defining what constitutes a service, right? That should be so obvious, but it's not. Like, well, it was a grant, but it was a grant, so they can perform these services. Does that count? What about photography? I don't know. It's hard. Who actually paid for the service? That should be an obvious one. But lots of times we've got a situation where we're paying somebody like, the company owner or, the representative of the company paid the vendor and then we're reimbursing that person. Well, really the company really paid it, right? So like I would issue a 1099 in that situation, but it's probably a loophole you could use to get around issuing them. And if you really wanted to argue it, which you don't, calculating the eligible year-to-date spend, like other types of reimbursements, like if you're reimbursing the contractor for stuff, but you're also paying them for services and the various payment methods are like 8,000. They're like 8,000 payment methods. I just, this is me. This is that picture from earlier. Dealing with vendors who refuse to fill out a W-9. I have language on that in our instructions internally in Keeper for what our team copies and pastes and sends to that vendor who's refusing to fill it out. I'm like, gosh, that's a real shame because the IRS requires us to file a 1099 for you anyway. And I'm going to have to check the box that you refused to give us this information. And that's going to get you audited. And God, we don't want that. Nobody wants that, right? And then that we magically suddenly get the W-9. So missing a 1099 vendor because it was in an unusual account. You've got 1099 vendors that are doing startup costs for businesses that haven't started operations yet or capital expenses. Maybe they did a build out. You're not going to notice that. QuickBooks doesn't notice it. Keeper does. But QuickBooks doesn't notice it. Waiting until year end to identify the vendors and collect the W-9s. You
Not
guys,
a good idea.
It's terrible. Chad, tell us how to fix this.
Yeah. There's so many pain points here that I've gone through. And it looks like we've got a little quote here about how some of our users are currently using Keeper's prepare 1099s report, which I'm going to share here on screen in just a second to walk through what that looks like. But it's really to avoid that long list of bullet points that we just saw. So that way the team can stay on top of those all year long rather than waiting until the end of the year. So I'd love to jump in, share my screen, and share how we make that process easier in Keeper, and then help take any questions on that while we have everyone. All right. Looks like Josh gave up sharing, so now I will try and share. And let me make sure I've got the right screen here. I've got.
And while he's doing that, I'm going to throw a few more things in this chat while he's sharing his screen. These are the links that I talked about earlier. And remember that once you get those slides, there are 4 pages of FAQs at the end. So if you have questions that don't get asked here, they will probably be in there.
And Chad, before you jump in, just because we're about 10 minutes to the top of the hour, if your questions don't get answered, we'd love to walk through this workflow. Again, we will add them to FAQs and we will respond to your questions after this webinar. We want everybody to feel like they're getting their questions answered. So
perfect. Well, I've shared my screen now. Josh, can you let me know? Can everyone see this?
I can see it.
Perfect. And just to kind of set the table here for what we're looking at before we get to the specific 1099s report, this screen here is what we call our client close page. And this is where you would manage the majority of your client work here in Keeper, broken up into several different sections here that are going to walk your team through that month-end close process. But included in that close process, because we integrate with QBO and Xero, we offer a lot of file review tools that are going to help the team to self-correct coding errors, and all of those changes are going to get synced back to the ledger. But the one that, of course, we want to highlight today is Keeper's Prepare 1099s report. And we've talked a lot about the pain points today around 1099s, and the hard part, is not the the actual preparation of the forms, but identifying the eligible vendors and collecting the W-9s in a timely manner. So that way you don't have to go to the hospital in January. And that's exactly what this report does. Because we integrate with QBO and Xero, Keeper is able to pull in any client vendors as soon as they hit that $600 year-to-date spend threshold, excluding credit card spend by default. So all year long, this report is pulling in any vendors that hit that threshold, but it's also pulling in any vendor profile information that's already been saved in QBO, along with any W-9s that might already be on file for that vendor as well. Keeper's recognizing that here. And all year long, that makes it easy for your team to identify when there's vendors on this list where maybe you're missing information. You don't know yet whether or not a 1099 is going to be necessary. So that next step is to, of course, request that W-9. And Keeper allows you to do that here by asking your client for that W-9 if they'll have it through Keeper's client portal, or making that request directly to your client's vendor, assuming you have an email address for that vendor that you can contact. And when those W-9s are received, your team's able to reference them on screen here, autofill the fields based on what Keeper's scanning from that W-9. Very important, you're able to check that very important box if that 1099 is going to be necessary for that vendor. Save it, and then all of that information is pushed back to QBO and Xero, so it's in there for you and your team at the end of the year. So no longer do you have to export a bunch of Excel files and run some if formulas to manually calculate that year-to-date spend for those vendors at the end of the year. You don't have to try and piece together Intuit's vendor reporting reports in there, which never, in my experience, help to surface those vendors that hit that spend threshold. Keeper's doing that all year long. And one of the things that Nancy mentioned earlier in the webinar here is we remember whether or not a 1099 is going to be necessary for that vendor. Think about your client's QBO files right now. So many of those vendors have that needs 1099 box unchecked. That doesn't tell you anything, right? That doesn't tell you that it's a C Corp and you've requested that W-9 5 years in a row. Keeper is going to remember that by, you have the option here to set that status. So if we see some like publicly traded companies or government entities, we know no 1099 is going to be needed. We can hit the no on those, and those are going to be filtered out of this report. So that way you're only concerning yourself with the yeses and the unknowns throughout the year.
I think this is like Allie's favorite thing in the world. She's who does our 1099s, and it just changed her life.
It makes it so much easier. And because it's something that's like built into your month-end close process, it's something that the team's looking at and thinking about all year long, rather than needing to wait until the end of the year. It's top of mind. It's easy because there's no manual calculations here. This is all happening through the integration between Keeper and QBO. And I know we talked a little bit about some of the nuance in certain transactions that may not be reportable for 1099 purposes. Know that you have the option here in Keeper to, of course, drill into any of the transactions included in that year-to-date spend calculation. So maybe there's one that is excludable. You're able to remove it. So that way you're only reporting on the actual reportable spend. So you always have that visibility to understanding what's included in that year-to-date spend calculation and excluding those that may not be reportable for 1099 purposes. And then the last thing that I want to share, we talked a little bit about, our clients might not be the best source for getting the W-9s. They may not be super timely. We can make those requests directly from the client's vendor. And just to show you what that would look like here in Keeper, if you have a W-9 or an email address on file for that vendor, you're able to push a notification to them. And that's going to look a little bit like this, where that vendor is going to get an email and say, we're such and such accounting firm. We're doing the books for such and such client. We need a W-9 for our records. From there, they're able to.
I mean, like you're saying this like it is not the most amazing thing in the entire world. Chad, this is the most amazing thing in the entire world.
It's so nice because then when they click this link, it takes them to a branded landing page that's going to match your firm. And here's that little ad that I mentioned earlier, where you're going to be able to link out to your services. But from this landing page, they're going to be able to upload that W-9 if they have one, or click here to fill one out on screen, which is going to produce that signed PDF that you would then maintain here in Keeper and push back to QBO, so you always have it on file. And then at the end of the year, when this list is just contains those 1099 needed status being yes, you're able to export that to CSV or some of the popular 1099 prep software. So that way you've got all the information aggregated here all year long. You plug it into that software and produce those 1099s. So very, very helpful in identifying those vendors and collecting and organizing that information throughout the year, so the team doesn't have to scramble again in January.
Chad, do you know, I have some colleagues, some of whom are on this call, who they actually pay for Keeper and they don't yet use most of the other features that Keeper offers.
Yeah.
They pay for Keeper for their clients just for this. Like,
Yeah.
just like if you used literally nothing else. And when I worked with Hughes and Strong, I put their info on one of the slides and in the chat. I worked with Hughes and Strong to like get Keeper working the best way for us internally. That they do amazing work, and they are like, oh no, we know tons of people who do this because this feature alone is worth like not just the amount that you pay each month, but like, hey, it's weight in gold.
Yeah. Imagine all of that stress that comes in January, being able to be better organized for that throughout the year and just eliminating that. So yeah, that's very common, Nancy, and especially this time of year. As you know, I put the sweater on today. That means it's sweater weather, but it's also time to start thinking about those W-9s and 1099s. So lots of great review tools, including the Prepare 1099s report to help firms as they get ready for year end, even if they're not exploring the task management or client portal side of Keeper.
And I know that we are running out of time here, but you haven't even, I mean, like the Track 1099 integration was something that like you created for last year, but then changed it right before 1099s were due to make it even better. And this is actually kind of hilarious to illustrate how amazing Keeper was with this. We were done with our 1099s earlier than we've ever been done with them before. We were completely done by the 28th of January. And we were so far ahead of it that we actually didn't get to make use of the updates that you made to the integration with Track 1099. So we are really excited about using that this year. And I think that there's an integration with, it's an export in the format that Track 1099 uses, and then you import it into there, but you do it with other programs too, right?
Yeah, we've got the tax 1099 import here as well. And then if there's another 1099 prep software that you're using that isn't one of the big two here, you are able to export it to CSV. So all of that information comes out, can be reorganized, so you can re-import it into whatever software you are using for prep purposes.
It's gold.
I know we're getting close to time here, so I'll stop sharing my screen and pass it back to Josh to reshare his. But thank you for letting me walk through that. I wish I had discovered that tool years earlier for very obvious reasons.
You would not have gone to the hospital.
No, I would not.
Awesome. Well, go ahead, Nancy.
I was just going to ask if there were any questions in particular that people had. I mean, I covered a lot more than I covered last time we did it, which is why I went over time. Sorry, guys.
Let's maybe we'll feature one or two that got like a bunch of upvotes, and we'll tackle the other ones offline.
That sounds great.
That's okay, but let's. I'm just going to start live answers on the screen. So.
Oh, fun. What's recommended to do if a client is adamant that they don't want to collect it, even after we advise that they should? Okay, very common question, and I'm glad you asked it. You just let the client know, okay, that's your decision, but I need to inform your tax preparer that they are going to have to check the box no on your income tax return where it says, and this is one of the reasons in Ask a CPA, we talk all the time about, trying to establish a really good relationship with that tax preparer so that you can communicate things like this, because maybe you won't be able to convince the client, but if you say to the client, hey, I'm going to have to let your tax preparer know about this so that they check the box no, and then maybe the tax preparer can say to the client, hey, do you really want to do that? I don't think you really want to do that. And maybe that'll convince them.
Awesome. Thanks, Nancy. Let's see
Sure.
if there's one more that we can do. Chad, I think this one is a little more about Keeper.
Yeah, is there a way to see what entity they are without having to look at the actual W-9? Can it be a field that gets completed and viewed while filling out fields on the W-9? That is a good question. I think right now that field is only available within the actual W-9 preview, but I definitely can understand the use case there. So let me share that with the engineering team and see if we can pull that out potentially as a separate field within that Prepare 1099s report that we just looked at.
Awesome. Well, I know we are 1 minute over. I want to be respectful of Chad's time, Nancy's time. Again, Nancy, thank you so much for everything you do to help us out. I just want to give you one last second if you have any more plugs.
Oh gosh, well, you know, my favorite thing in the world right now is my Ask a CPA group. We launched in July, and I'm so completely indebted to these people for just it's just been an amazing experience. And if you are interested in learning about Ask a CPA, please, please, please take a quick look. I'll drop it in chat one more time. It's $47 a month. We meet twice a month. Everything's recorded. All the questions are timestamped. They're all in a database. I mean, it's seriously, and it's just a great group of people. So please come join us.
Thanks, Nancy.
Thank
to everyone
you.
that joined us today, we really appreciate it. Again, sorry we didn't have a little extra time to go through questions, but we're going to do this again with Diamond, with Earmark. We shared that link. We'll broadcast that. And
Josh, you'll send me the questions, and I'm happy to follow up.
Awesome. Well, thank you,
Thanks,
Nancy.
y'all.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, everybody. Have a really good
Bye.
one. Thank you for being here. Mwah, mwah, mwah.
Take care.
Bye, all.
Have a great day.